First, remember that I said I didn't think it was necessarily the right strategy. I in fact said it was the strategy.
The strategy.
That,
Okay.
that was. Now, I've been around nose counting long enough to know that elections are about more than the national election. For many years, they talked about the Southern Lock that the Republicans had, and not just in terms of presidential races, but in terms of congressional gains. And if you begin to look at the shift in congressional power and success, you cannot say that the strategy didn't produce some numbers, convincing numbers, that it was a strategy. While it might not have been the right strategy, it was a strategy that worked across the board.
I agree. If you take a look at the presidential level, clearly, I mean, it seesawed back and forth. But you need to take a look a step below that and peel the onion back. If you take a look at the governor's races over the last 30 years, Republicans, for the most part, controlled the governor's races across this country. And why are the governor's races important? Well, it's because of redistricting, as we know. It also, obviously, it's enormous power that most governors have across this country. So it's not just at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Again, it's at the governor's races, but it's also at the congressional level as well. Let me be very clear, and go on record as saying this, is that I fundamentally disagree. I wasn't around during this time, but if I was, I would have fundamentally disagreed with the Southern strategy, because there clearly was a strategy against the haves and the have-nots, and to a certain degree subliminally against black versus white. But it worked. It worked. I mean, if you take a look, as Joe mentioned a few moments ago, at the presidential races over the last 40 years, Republicans cleaned Democrats' clock more so than the other way around. But fast forward to today, 2012, during the next presidential cycle, the real question is whomever the Republican nominee is going to be, Huckabee, Palin, Santorum, Romney, I mean, Gingrich, you going down the list. The question is can that person hold the South? And the South is defined a little bit differently now. The South really now is, in terms of presidential battleground states, it's Florida. It's to a certain degree, it's Virginia. And remember, these are states that Barack Obama won 2 years ago. If someone would have said to me back in 2007 that Barack Obama would carry the state of Virginia, I would say you're nuts. But from the conservative and obviously from a Southern standpoint, he picked up that state, and he won Florida as well. So the definition of a Southern strategy, again, has changed to a certain degree in 2010 and obviously in 2012.
But I want to come back because I think it's important that we can continue to peel the layers of the onion. How many of you know, or how many of you would contest this statement, that there was collaboration between the Republicans who were executing the Southern strategy and the NAACP?
Could you say that again, Robert?
How many of you is there anybody that would contest this historical fact that in the execution of the Southern strategy, it in part was aided and abetted and embraced by the NAACP? And
Yes, every one of us is on the edge of our seats. I know I am.
Well, it was about districts, and it was about creating black congressional districts. And so the drawing of lines that was consistent with the Southern strategy that produced more Republican congressional seats, also produced more African American dominated districts. And so there was a trade-off. You know, you got more Republicans, but you got more congressional seats coming out of the South that were undeniably drawn to produce black candidates. So many times, you know, there was a gentleman's agreement with the Congressional Black Caucus with how these districts were drawn. They were drawn to benefit two groups, Republicans and black Democrats.
I want to come back to that, but first I want to, because we've talked about the Southern strategy, and what in effect was a mass migration of black voters out of the Republican Party and to the Democratic Party. A couple of weeks ago, we began to address the question not only of that migration, but of exactly what has to happen in order to maybe reverse that trend, to get the numbers back to 60-40, 50-50, where black voters feel that they can register as Republicans, vote with Republicans, and I don't know about you, but I sometimes feel as if being a card-carrying member of the Democrat Party is, you know, on one side is Democrat, on the other side is your membership to the Brotherhood.
Okay. Good.
Well, you know, it's fascinating because if you take a look at the African-American race, or the culture, if you will, on paper, it smacks right dab in the middle of conservatism, lowercase c. Prayer in schools, going to church, honoring your family, making sure that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and understanding the value of hard work, spending only what you have, and also recognizing that if in fact you father someone out of wedlock or whatever the case may be, that you own up to your responsibility. So in so many ways, I mean, if you take a look at the African American culture, it is lowercase conservative. But as we all know, the reason why that African Americans overwhelmingly vote for Democrats is a myriad of reasons, because African Americans have been hoodwinked to believe that the Democratic Party is the only solution for a way out, if you will, or for a better life. Now, we know that's not completely accurate, but we also know is that perception is reality. And we also know is that the Democratic Party has done a phenomenal job. Take Barack Obama out of it because obviously he's abnormal in this context because he is African American, but in the context of reaching out to African Americans, talking that talk, walking that walk, the Democratic Party has done a very good job at that. Fast forward to 2000, a guy by the name of George W. Bush comes onto the scene. And when you take a look at his record in Texas, his philosophies and his beliefs, one would think that African Americans overwhelmingly would have voted for him, and they did back in '94 and '98 when he ran for re-election. Also, as governor. Also running for re-election in 2004, 8% of African Americans voted for George W. Bush. And the reason why, again, is because in the context of what this person stood for, i.e. the president running for re-election, African Americans said, you know what, faith-based, gay marriage, or the ban of gay marriage and so forth, this fits squarely in terms of what I believe. So what needs to happen in the future, Joseph? Well, I think we know the answer to that. The Republican Party needs to do an even better job of reaching out to African Americans, not placating to them and talking in platitudes, but specifically talking about the issues that are important to all of us.
But Robert, let me stop you there for just a second, because we've just heard and talked about the redistricting, the gerrymandering of districts, such that who are Republicans reaching out to when they don't represent anyone in these districts? 75% of black voters live under 7 layers of Democratic representation.
The old adage is the most untenable situation that a group of voters would want to find themselves in is a situation where one party takes you for granted and the other party just writes you off. So from the standpoint of politics in America, it is in both the African American community's interest that it take a hard look at Republicans who walk the walk, talk the talk, and deliver. On the other hand, it is in the Republicans, just looking at pure demographics, it is in the Republican Party's interest to ask for the order. All too often now, Republicans don't ask for the order. They don't show up. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we have created districts where Republicans don't need to ask for the African American vote. But that's at the congressional level. But folks who are running for governor, folks who are running for mayor, folks who are running for the county commission, they need to be able to ask for the order. and it's just smart politics. Let me just go to 1984 in San Francisco. Democratic convention, Jesse Jackson is making his breakthrough. Who do the Democrats go to get to stop Jesse Jackson but Andrew Young? And essentially what they did was basically play hardball politics with Jackson and tell him to, shut up, sit down, and speak when you're told. And it was hardball politics that worked. He came out of San Francisco, and some of the things that he said in political fora was pretty convincing. He said, it is only when we create a competitive two-party system that we actually have value, where what happened to him in San Francisco will not happen to folks across the board as we go forward. So I would just tell you that it goes two ways. I'll use my own practical experience. I run as, and I was, the most conservative statewide office holder in Ohio. In my first statewide race, I got about 30% of the African American vote. By my third statewide race, I got 48% of the African American vote as the most conservative statewide candidate running in either party. Now, part of the reason that I appealed to the African American voter, at least as a conservative Republican, getting 48%, was because I showed up and I placed the order. Two, I was able to make the case that what I stood for in terms of job creation and education mattered. I wonder, just fast forward for a second, how in the world anybody who is the parent of a black student in underperforming and failed schools could be excited about the president in 2012 when he turned his back on black kids, when he sided with the teachers union and budgeted out, X'd out the DC Opportunity Scholarships for black youngsters to at least have a fighting chance to have an education like his daughters. At the end of the line, we have to begin to hold Democrat elected officials accountable for results and for their behaviors, particularly as they relate to our families and to our children. So I believe that it is a dynamic relationship between the Democrats who, at the grassroots level, at the voter level, and those of us who aspire to lead them from a Republican philosophy. You got to show up, and you got to be able to show where your plans actually work. We created jobs as Republican conservatives, and we were able to make that case.